Hello and welcome to a video about the topic of cells. Okay, and this particular topic is specific to a module called B2 for the AQA GCSE Additional Science course. Okay, and I'm going to spend about the next 14 or 15 minutes going through the key parts that you need to know, or the key points that you need to know for the topic of cells. Okay, now I want you to remember that while I'm going through this quite quickly, you can of course pause, rewind, replay the video at any time you like, just to make sure you understand the different aspects of what you need to know about. Okay, now the first thing we're going to go through is labeling the two types of cell that we study, and the two major types are, or the major groups are, animal cells and plant cells, and you need to know what is present in both plant and animal cells. And there are 5 things that we're going to talk about, and you also need to know what parts are present in plants only. Okay, so let's get started. I think the first 3 points are probably the easiest, so let's get those out of the way. The first one is the nucleus, second one is cytoplasm, and the third one is the cell membrane. Okay, and most people remember these. They're quite simple, they're quite straightforward, and you come across those a lot in your science when you're learning it at secondary school. Now, the parts that they refer to are here. Okay, the cytoplasm is a jelly-like liquid that all the other bits are floating around in. The cell membrane is there for the animal cell, and it's just inside that thick black line for the plant cell. Okay, so these are 3 very simple labels that you should know and understand. Now, there's a couple more that you don't come across very often until you reach GCSE, and these are parts that you can only see through a very powerful microscope called an electron microscope. Okay, all these other parts you can see in a regular microscope that you might have in your school labs, called a light microscope. The best light microscopes might just be able to pick up some of these, but really to see these well you need an electron microscope, and these parts are much smaller and therefore need to have more magnification. Right, these sausage shaped structures are called mitochondria. Okay, and that's plural. If you're talking about one, we say mitochondrion. Okay, that means one, mitochondria, that's plural. And these little black blobs here, they're actually much smaller than mitochondria, but they are called ribosomes, and we're going to look at what these things do in a minute. Okay, now just as a little extra point here, if you take one of these out, okay, and magnify it still further, it looks a little bit like that. It has a double membrane, and the inside membrane is folded inwards like that. So I wanted to show you that just so you recognize it if they show you in a little bit more detail in an exam. But generally they're small sausage-shaped structures. The ribosome, the ribosome, if I can get it there, will actually just look like a blob, no matter how much you magnify it. Okay, but they're usually shown as little round spots or blobs. Okay, now the next thing is that I've just got a couple of diagrams which I found. Okay, it's important that you are able to recognize these parts whether you have a diagram that looks like this, or a photograph. Okay, so we're going to come back to this in a sec. Once we've discussed what's in plant cells only, and this is also quite straightforward. We have cell wall, we have chloroplasts, and we have the sap vacuole. We have the sap vacuole. Vacuole, okay? And the cell wall here is the outside thick, rigid structure there. The chloroplasts are these little green structures, and the sap vacuole is this large structure inside the cell, which actually looks like a bag inside the cell in reality. Right, so it's talking about you having to recognize these parts in a whole bunch of different types of diagram. So it might be worth pausing here just to see if you could recognize the different parts in the animal cell and the different parts in the plant cell. Okay, so pause it, see if you can label the parts, and that will give you an idea that you are able to do that. Okay, so moving on. These are the functions of all the different parts. Now, because it's quite straightforward to learn and remember what the different parts do, there's no point me just reading through all this for you, because you can read it for yourself. But I do want to emphasize something very important, and that is the function of these two parts here, the ribosomes and the mitochondria. Okay, and the reason why I want to go through that is because they often appear in higher level questions. Okay, now the function of ribosomes, I say here, is to make proteins. Okay, but the second part in explaining that or describing that is that you have to say it comes from these things called amino acids. And amino acids are like building blocks that make proteins. Okay, and proteins are important for repairing cells, repairing damaged tissue, and for growth. Okay, the second one here, mitochondria, the answer is in two parts as well in terms of what it does. The first one you would say is it produces energy, and the second part of that answer is from respiration. Okay, the rest of the stuff here you can pause, you can make notes on, you can write down, and you can read through by yourself. If you don't want to do that, as I say, I'll point you to a link at the end where you can actually get these notes for yourself for free. Okay, now the next bit that's quite important is looking at what we call specialized cells. Now, looking at the clock, I see I've got just over 6 minutes. So while I'm going quite quickly, remember, do pause and go over it again if you feel you need to. Right, right now, every single cell in the body actually is what we call specialized. Okay, and that means it has a special job. No cell actually sits around the body and says, well, I'll just kind of do general things, I'll help out here and there. No, every single cell has a special job, and therefore it has a special structure, and you need to be able to explain what that job is and explain the link between the structure and the job. So let's start off with a very simple one. Here's a diagram of a sperm cell, and straight away you can spot that it's got a tail. Okay, now the way you respond to these kinds of questions is you describe the structure and then you link it to a job that it does. So very simply for this one, we say the sperm cell has a tail, and this is the linking part, so it can swim to the egg. Okay, so notice that I have to say what the structure is and then link it to what it does. Okay, now this is a question you might see on a slightly higher demand paper, or a slightly higher demand section of the paper, and that's to do with this area here. And inside there are lots of sausage-shaped structures. You can see if you look carefully, and those are mitochondria, which we talked about before. And how would you describe the structure of this versus the job that it has to do? Well, you can say it has lots of mitochondria, and then the linking part is to provide energy, because we said mitochondria provide energy. You could also say from respiration. Okay, so there's three parts to this. There's potentially 3 marks here in the exam. We say what it has, and then the link to what it does, and by which process. Okay, so that's how you would answer these kinds of questions. This structure over here is another common type of cell you see. It's called a root hair cell, and a root hair cell, I've got a picture here for you to see. Okay, this is a root. It's been magnified, and the root hairs are these strand-like structures that come off the root, and they are actually very small, and they are actually cells. Okay, now the thing you notice here is this hair-like structure, and you can say has a root hair or a hair like structure. And remember, the linking part is this to increase surface area, and this is actually a better linking part, so it can absorb more water, oops, that's untidy, and minerals are going off the page there, right. Okay, so notice that I forgot to put in the nucleus, and notice it doesn't have any chloroplasts, and that is because it's under the ground, and so it doesn't need to absorb sunlight. Okay, so the last cell I want to look at now is called a red blood cell. Again, here I've shown a photograph of what red blood cells look like, and that's simply because my drawing is very bad, and you probably wouldn't recognize it if you didn't actually see a real picture of it. Okay, so I'll just move that out of the way. Now, what key features do red blood cells have? Well, the first one is that it has no nucleus. Okay, and the reason for that is it's linked to, so it has more space to carry oxygen. Okay, so there's the structure or the feature that it has, and okay, it's all going wrong here. Nucleus, so it has more space to carry oxygen, so there's my linking part there, so it has. The other thing is it has a special shape. Okay, and if you look, it's like a disc shape, but it's got these indentations on both sides. It has a special shape to give a large surface area, and then my linking part, so it can carry more oxygen. Okay, I promise you it's much neater in the notes that I've provided. Alright, so that's the key part of cells. We've got the structure of cells, what the different parts do, and this idea of specialized cells. And we've taken 3 examples: the sperm cell, a root hair cell from a plant, and a red